Thank you, Samantha, for joining me today. I am so happy to talk to you and get to know you a little bit better. I can't wait to hear all about your journey through simple living and homesteading. But I would love for you to maybe just get started to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and just how you got started on this path.
Sure. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Samantha Hatt, and I'm from the blog East Pine Home. I live on the east coast of Canada. I have 6 children under the age of 9. We homeschool. We have a crazy story about how we ripped up our whole front lawn and put in a garden. We garden, we have chickens, we have ducks. It's pretty much controlled chaos 24/7. And because I have such a hefty crew, I do a lot of baking to feed them.
That's amazing. I think I didn't realize you had 6 children and you're doing all these things and ducks alone are enough. So
Oh Lord. Yeah, they're a trip.
yeah, I don't know. We raised ducks last year and I was like, well, I don't know. These are my favorite birds in the world, but that's okay.
Um, I was opting to make them dinner, but my husband absolutely loves them, and so do the kids. So I
Oh,
guess.
so that is interesting because I think people end up going one way or the other. They either love them or they're like, these are not for me. So that is
Yeah.
really fascinating. But okay, I want to talk to you really a lot about your baking because I know you do a lot of that. And I think it's great for people to hear how others do manage baking from scratch and just hearing that kind of process, especially when you are feeding so many people and keeping that manageable. So I'm so curious if you can share a little bit about how did you get started with baking in the way that you bake? Maybe walk us
Okay.
through that
Yes.
process for you.
So it actually started probably about, I want to say about like 6 years, 6 or 7 years ago. I only had 1 or 2 children. And I actually watched a documentary called Fed Up with Katie Couric, and it was talking about childhood obesity. And the main focus of the entire documentary was sugar and how much sugar is in packaged and processed foods. And I kind of like fell down into this rabbit hole of ingredients and what was in our food, what was being added into our food, and sugar in general, white flour, all of these things that are just not good for you. And I realized that our very steady diet of ravioli and white bread sandwiches and Ritz crackers and Oreos were probably not the healthiest things to be feeding my kids. And also I really learned really quickly, having all of my kids are under the age of 9. My oldest is 9, my youngest is 2, so I had babies back to back to back, which got very expensive very quickly. And I know that probably everyone listening is in agreement that inflation, especially this year, it's just climbing in the grocery store.
Yeah.
So even back then, though, just adding so many mouths to our family so quickly, I realized that I can make a loaf of bread for 70 cents. I can make a loaf of bread for 50 cents. Well, back then I could do it for 50 cents. Now it's like 75. But
Right. Well,
I was realizing that I could make food so much cheaper. And if I stopped buying goldfish crackers, which I then, had learned they're not even that good for my kids, and I could make a blueberry muffin that has no additives, no chemicals, and just pure ingredients that I could pronounce, that was really the direction that I wanted to go. And I think it was also like this girlish homemaking fantasy to like feed my kids a delicious blueberry chocolate chip cookie, like whatever pancakes that mom made. And it sounds so cliche, but it was just part of like my heart that I was like, oh, like I remember looking at my son, my very first baby when he was born, and thinking, man, I can't wait until you have teeth. And I don't know how to cook, but I'm going to learn. And you're going to love whatever I make.
oh, I love that. Did you grow up having that type of experience as a kid? having a parent that cooks.
Wow.
No, okay. So this is
I grew up in a very much like, oh, the 100-calorie Oreos, these must be
Mm,
good for you. It was, my mom can, bless her heart, she can cook a couple of things really well, but she's not well known for her cooking. And you know, a lot of people aren't, but I had a very close friend who, if there's any Canadians listening, she was a Newfoundlander. So she was a Newfie. So she had a lot of character, and I loved her. And I would remember going over to my friend's house, and she would always have like baked bread and like different treats that I had never even, you know, tried or seen, and everything was always so delicious. And I was like, oh, like I want this one day. Like I want to be that kind of mom that like my kids are homeschooled, but if they come home that like it smells like something is baking and they know they're going to get fed.
I always equate that to like not homekeeping, but like homemaking, that like
Yeah.
smell is like that to me is what like what homemaking can be, is like
Yes.
that's something that tends in that way. Yeah, I love that. So, do you have anything that you love to make for your kids now that you've gone through this journey? Like, what's your
Yeah.
favorite thing to make?
So I would have to say like bread and muffins.
Mm.
Bread and muffins are like, one, I love muffins because I can make dozens.
Yes, right.
Takes dozens to feed them all,
Yeah.
but I can make dozens. I can set them on the counter. They can have them for breakfast. They can have them for a snack. They can, you know, take them on the road.
Yeah.
Muffins are quick and easy. I love making muffins, but bread is like it is the cornerstone of everything. To me, I'm like bread is toast, bread is sandwiches, bread with soup. Like the amount of bread that we can blow through. We blow through about 2 loaves a day now. And I just love the variety of bread. You can
Mhm.
have sourdough, you can have white bread, you
Yeah.
can have rolls. There is literally endless. It's literally endless. So I love me a good loaf of bread.
I think that's incredible. So, I mean, it's interesting because my family's been on this bizarre journey of my children and spouse are celiac. And so like we've had to actually like replace bread. I mean, we actually eat a lot of bread. It's just not
Mhm.
traditional, which is,
Yeah.
but I know you do a lot of grinding of your actual grain. And
Yes.
so, which for us, we have to do that too, but we're of course grinding like other things like rice to make flour.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how that got started, because I think a lot of people go, oh, okay, maybe I can make my own bread. But then how did you transition from like, I'll make my own bread and muffins to like, well, now I'm going to grind my own grain? Because that's like a whole other level, right?
Listen, that was a can of worms.
I bet.
So
Yeah.
basically, I'm going to give a really quick history
Okay,
lesson
good.
to just, you know, incite some fear in everyone.
Yes,
So, you know, we could always use more of that.
absolutely.
So, about 200 years ago, or in the 1800s, around then, millers. So, flour has always had the three parts. The three parts that make up a grain are the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. When you buy white flour, you get the endosperm. You are not getting the bran, you are not getting the germ. The germ is actually what holds a lot of the nutrients, a grain in general, and there's literally thousands of grains, but I'm just saying in general, hold about 40 of the 44 essential nutrients that we need to survive. That would be like, you know, like iron, magnesium, all of those, what you would find in a multivitamin. Well, when the millers started taking out the bran and germ, they realized that flour had a longer shelf life.
Oh,
So by doing that, it was not going rancid because a piece of grain, it has like a coating like any other seed would, and that's its defense mechanism for, you know, replanting itself. When you crack that open, it is just think of like a banana. Like if you crack open a banana, what happens? It starts to oxidize. It
oh yeah,
starts to turn brown.
it's really gross.
And flour or wheat does the exact same thing. So when you start cracking it open, when you are grinding your grains at home, you have about a 24-hour period before that grain has lost all of its nutritional value.
Wow.
From yeah.
That's
And a
really
lot of it
fast.
really fast.
Yeah.
Like you want to literally use it within the hour, or you have to freeze it to preserve it. But basically I learned that the flour on the shelves is rancid. It is filler food. It's and you know when you think about celiac disease and all of these different things, it starts to kind of like it starts to kind of go together
That's
that,
fascinating.
oh, flour is not really that great for you.
Right.
Um, and anyways, when the Millers started doing this and they took out that the FDA of the time basically started seeing a huge spike in nervous system disorders and health issues coming across the board. And they traced it back to the Millers. And they said, listen, you have two options: do something about it, or go back and add back in the brand and the germ. Well, the Millers said, well, and of course they didn't have the science at the time, but
Right.
they said, well, we'll just add back in folate and vitamin B and like one other thing. And that's where you get enriched
It's
all purpose
yeah.
flour. That is where those words come from.
Yeah.
So when I learned that, and I want to just shout out to all the mamas out there with picky eaters, because I have a child who is so picky. And I swear she would eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day for the rest of her life.
We all have one
And
of those. Yes.
it kind of made my heart sink because I'm just like, I'm handing you filler food. I'm
Mm,
not handing you real food. And so I want to make a note that grain mills are very expensive.
mhm.
They my grain mill, I am in Canada, so the exchange rate and duty and stuff, it costs about $700. They can be cheaper, but just for my specific mill, it was a huge investment. And I waited about 2.5 years before I actually purchased a grain mill to make sure that like I was making a clear-headed decision.
It's one of those ones you
But
don't make in the middle of the night. Yes.
yeah, no. So I saved up and I got a grain mill. And the purpose of that was literally inspired by my daughter, because I was like, when I hand you a sandwich, I want to make sure that I'm handing you the absolute best that I can hand you. And let me tell you, I thought I was a good baker until I started working with whole grain.
I bet it's so different. It's so different. Yes.
So different.
Yeah.
It's, honestly, it's like it's probably in the same realm of when you started cooking gluten free,
Yeah. It's really
because oh, it's such a learning curve, because that bran is present. Bran literally acts like a razor blade and it just shards through gluten structure. So you get a lot of flatter bread, you get a lot of,
mm,
flatter muffins, dense. And but you know what? I am this is why I actually started East Pine Home. My blog has a whole section dedicated to freshly ground grains. And because I want to help people with all of the things that I have learned
yeah.
and succeed, because it can be very overwhelming. There's literally thousands of grains. They all behave differently.
Yes, they do.
You're not in Kansas anymore. You're not working with white flour.
It's incredible. I'm curious for you. Actually, I want to know one. I want to know another thing too about the type. How did you decide the type or the brand of grain meal? I don't know if the brand really matters. I'm curious what features about the grain mill you were really interested in having.
Okay. So there's basically three kinds of grain mills.
Okay.
There's the manual,
Hmm.
which you're cranking. I'm not doing that. That
No.
wasn't even on the table. They're the cheapest. They're the cheapest ones. You're looking at a couple $100. They clamp to your table. You can grind a cup of flour at a time. I knew that I needed volume
Mm-hmm.
because I'm doing a lot of baking.
Yeah.
So then you kind of open the door to two different kinds of mills. You have a steel impact mill, which basically uses steel to bust the grains open,
Okay.
and I'll talk about the pros and the cons in a minute, but you have your steel impact mill, and then you have stone ground or stone grinders,
Ah,
stone mill. I have a stone mill. The reason I chose a stone mill was because steel mills, they don't have as many options when it comes to coarseness versus fineness, and they also heat up a bit more than a stone mill, which
mhm.
you can lose a little bit of nutrients with because it gets too
Yeah,
hot.
that makes sense.
So yeah, so I opted for the stone because I was like, I'm only buying this once. I'm
Right.
never buying another one. So
No.
I might as well spend the money
Yeah.
and get the one that I want. So I went with the Mill Harvest, and
Okay.
it looked very similar to the Mock Mill. Honestly, Mock Mill is not very accessible in Canada.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, we there it's grain mills are quite hard to get a hold of in Canada, versus the United States. And so there's just more Nutrimil dealers in Canada. So I opted for the Nutrimil instead of jumping through hoops to get a Nutrimil. There are other brands out there that are more expensive. I think it's a Como or Kobo, but they're over $1,000,
Mhm.
which I just couldn't justify spending. My one of my friends has one. She's obsessed with it. She thinks it's
Yeah.
the best thing ever, and I don't doubt that it's not. I think that she's probably in love with it. But at the end of the day, flour is flour.
Mhm.
A stone mill is a stone mill, and so I opted for the Nutrimel Harvest.
That is no, that's see, that's really helpful to know because I know that happens in other types of tools too. Like I can't think of an example now, but I know that's come up for me where I look at it and go, oh, if this gets too hot, this will take
Yeah.
away, it'll actually neutralize or whatever I'm trying to do. And it's like, okay, well, how do I? So that's a really good tip because I don't think a lot of people think about that part of it in terms of like the actual mechanics and what's happening inside of a mill like that. So that's
Well, and
really
I think that people also too, they see the price tag.
yeah.
I mean, if
Sorry.
you're talking,
Yeah.
and I mean, and that's just a big factor because it's
Yeah.
very like that's a huge investment.
Mhm.
Maybe it's not for everyone, but I think for the majority speaking, it's a lot.
Yes.
And um, you know, a steel impact mill, you're looking at, in the States, probably like $200 to $300, um, versus a stone mill where you're looking anywhere between six to 1,000.
Yeah.
So that's a big jump. So, and and there are some pros to the steel mill. Like I think it can get a tiny bit finer, and I think that a lot of them have bigger drums. So
Mm.
like you don't have to like put a bowl underneath and constantly pour it in like you do with the stone. But I'm like, whatever. I got time.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of like shifting around anyway, like so yeah, I don't mind stuff like that either. I could see other people being like, "Oh, I don't want to be fussy with it or in that way," but
Yes.
I don't mind either. Well, do your kids help with the grinding at all or is that something that you definitely do on your own?
Um,
It's not a child
Honestly,
friendly
it's such a quick thing. Like if I'm going to bake, my oldest son he is quite the avid baker.
Oh, that's great.
He has recently started grinding his own grains. But I start my kids off using just like unbleached white flour just because it builds confidence.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have to treat it the same way either, right? So they can like
No.
keep it into something and you're still going to get something that's mostly edible. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, and and even though I just gave a rant about white flour, we still use white flour. We still mix it in. White flour is delicious,
Mhm.
and it's great. It tastes great. It does wonderful things for bread and for baked goods. It makes them puffy and fluffy, and makes you feel nostalgic. So I'm never going to not have it in my house. But especially for my kids when they're baking, I like to, if he's going to make muffins, I want them to turn out, perfect. So I'm going to give him the recipe and say, hey, use some white flour or, do half and half.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been his favorite thing too, is because now that he's old enough to understand all of this, he's like, well, I want to make it healthier.
Mhm.
So he will do, he'll do half and half, and he's like, "Oh, I can just sneak it in." I'm like, "Okay."
Okay, do you sift your flour, your grain milled flour? Do you sift that when you're, because that's like a trick with gluten-free is that we sift everything. It's like you like handle it with tender love and care. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that this is like a debatable thing.
Okay.
Some people religiously sift out the bran. They are like, bran is the devil, bran is
Ah,
bad, it must go. So they sift it out. When you do sift it out, you do get a fluffier flour because bran is like literal razor blades. Um, I the reason that people sift it out is because of the phytic acid. They're
mm,
like, it's the phytic acid, it's not water soluble. I have read a couple of food studies by actual food scientists. I don't know how you would refer to them,
I don't either.
that have said that phytic acid is okay to consume because it stimulates something called phytis or phytase,
Oh,
where it literally, your body, it kind of sends out this enzyme to help break it down. And it actually has benefits. It helps with, fighting cancer, like cancer cells and stuff. So, like, they're like, oh, it's actually good for you. So, whether or not you believe that study, that's up to the users. Also, bran helps with digestion. If you're backed up, you won't be.
right.
You won't be. So trust me, it's keeping my kids regular. So I do not sift out my bran. Sometimes I do. Most of the times I do not because I'm lazy. So, and I'm like, who's got the time? I don't. I certainly do not. If I do, I sift it out and then I throw it to the ducks and they're quite
Yeah.
happy with it. But it really depends on kind of the recipe and what I'm going for.
That makes sense. Do you have recipes that you have found to be really successful, either that you've made for your kids that they like, or well, and not and or maybe also ones that have been successful for your children to get started in baking? Because I think that also can be tricky, right? Is having them start with something, but that's kind of a two-part question I just sent you. I just threw at you.
Yeah,
So,
no, I find that a lot of recipes can be adjusted.
hmm.
Um, I Sue Becker is kind of the freshly milled grain queen. So her book Bread Beckers has a lot of really good recipes. I've had a lot of success with that one if I'm using 100%
Ah,
freshly milled grain. Um, if I'm looking at other recipes, I might do half and half. Um, my kids, like if they're gonna make donuts or something, usually we can get away with using something like spelt, and yeah, I just kind of, if I'm weary if it's gonna turn out, I'll just do half and half because then I'm like, at least we're getting some benefit from it, and at least I know that it'll have enough white flour to just kind of puff it up.
uh-huh.
There are some grains though that I do end up, really like kamut. It doesn't have a lot of gluten structure, so I do sift out the bran because it helps it stand.
Yeah.
Because I like that fluffy, you
Uh-huh.
know, carb.
Right. Yeah. It's very
Like
comforting.
I know. Well,
Yeah.
and I'm like, and it's what I think we've all just kind of grown up with.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that plays a role too.
Absolutely. I feel like yeah, there's that nostalgia, but there's that sense of home in it as well. That feeling of like, oh yes, this is what I remember as being home. It was never necessarily like hard as brick little biscuits or something.
No, it's what you're used to. It's what you're
Yeah.
used to because, and I mean, essentially white bread at the store is kind of like cake. It's it's oil and flour and it's fluffy and it's soft. And
Mm.
then, one of my best friends is very close with like an old order Mennonite family. And like the first question I asked is like, what's their bread like?
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was like, it is nothing to show for. She's like, real bread. She's like, they eat it because they have to. But she's like, it is nothing like ours. She's like, it's literally just a dense
Mhm.
brick. and that is their bread. And I'm just like, that makes sense because in this journey, I have made plenty of very dense, dense loaves that, if I were to hand to company, they would be like, "Oh, thank you," like,
Girl,
"Mm."
well, that's it. My daughter and I were doing something. She was having to study like food that kids ate like a couple hundred years ago, and it was fun because like for lunch they would send just a piece of bread with their kid to school, and she's like, "How do you subsist off of one piece of bread?" But then it's exactly that. It's like the bread was so dense, and it was just like
Yeah,
packed with protein and nutrients, like
yeah,
just very different from what you would go and buy now.
yeah.
Um,
No, it is. It's so different,
mhm.
and and it is more filling.
Yes.
I sent my dad, who has been eating white bread for 64 years.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I sent him home with some waffles that were whole grains. And he said to me, he's like, one, they were delicious. But he was like, two, he's like, I couldn't get over how full I was.
Yeah.
He was like, I got to lunch, and this is a lumberjack redneck who has been eating, his coffee and toast with his,
Uh-huh.
lunch at 12 o'clock forever. And he was like, I got to lunchtime, and he's like, and I just realized, like, I'm not hungry.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I was just like, told ya.
No, but that's so fascinating, right? Like that, because I always thought, like, how would you subsist off of one piece of bread? I'm thinking, especially a couple hundred years ago, people were working so physically heavily, all day long. I was like, that wouldn't sustain you at all if you were just like, here's your piece of
Yeah. Well,
that.
and you know what? And the thing is, like, going back to like that history lesson, bread was always, and it has always been, poor people food.
Uh-huh.
You know, that is why it was so devastating, and it was so easy for them to pinpoint where all these health issues were coming from,
Uh,
because everybody ate bread.
right.
Everybody
Sure.
ate bread. Everybody had milled flour, and they were using it right away, because back then you didn't store things like that like we do now.
Right, you would store it as the grain, I guess, or something, but right, even that would go
Yeah.
bad. So that makes sense. Yes, you just
Yeah,
sure.
well, like they would, most of them would either have, I mean, communities were different back then.
Yes.
There would be a stone mill within town you'd go and take it to, and then take it home, and you would just do that as needed. Because you like I said, like the grain itself stores for so long, and they knew that, and that was just like the regular routine of hauling it to the millers and then hauling it home. But that was a huge pain.
Yeah.
It's a
Right, yeah,
lot easier to just go once.
yes.
And then, you got this white flour that was just so much better,
Mhm.
better, and like to bake with. Like, you were getting this fluffy, beautiful loaf that tastes 20 times better. So, when you think of it that way, it's like, yeah, like, you can be sustained off of bread because it has all these nutrients, because it is so filling. One piece of bread keeps you going. Like, I make my kids waffles now, and they just pop it in there, and they need one,
That's
and they're good to
incredible.
go. And I mean, like, compared to something like an Eggo waffle,
Right?
you could eat, like, I literally, okay, this is a tell-all, but, like, I think it was in my 4th pregnancy, I went through this, like, I was craving Eggo waffles, and I'm not even kidding, I would eat, like, 7.
I
And
I
then
know pregnancy is weird. It does weird things to us.
listen, I'm pretty sure one kid was made out of, like, Pop-Tarts.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
And, like, now eating them now, I'm like, "This tastes like cardboard." But, like, I
Huh?
remember eating, like, 7 Eggo waffles, and I was not even full. Like, I was like,
Wow.
"I could eat 7 more," because, like, there's nothing to them.
No. I'm
And I
actually
don't recommend that to your viewers.
right, we're not recommending that you go and eat a 7, 8 waffle,
No,
whatever. But,
no.
actually, I would love to know if do you have a waffle recipe that you would be willing to share? Because I can put it in our
Ugh,
put it
yes, it's
okay.
on my Instagram right now.
Is it okay?
There is a dedicated YouTube video coming, and a blog post. I
Okay.
literally, it was
Well,
supposed to go up
literally.
today. and it wasn't happening. So it's coming this week. So
Great. Okay.
by the time you air this episode, it'll probably be up. So yes, they can go and check that out.
That would be great. I think, yeah, we'll link to it because I think that would be so
Yes.
helpful for people to see what it is that you are putting into those recipes.
Yeah.
And then actually you did mention some of the ancient grains that you've worked with. I'm curious if there's others that you've explored that you really like or that you would recommend
Yeah.
somebody who maybe is like curious but hasn't gotten started, like where should they go? Where should they start? And maybe where even should they source these things, you know?
Okay. So I'll start with the sourcing.
Okay.
Um, I can guarantee pretty much everyone who's listening, if you type in your province or state or major city that you're close to, you know, grain mill, North Carolina,
Okay.
you know, something's going to pop up. Grain mills are everywhere. And a lot of people don't even know that they exist or think about them. But if you think about all of the farmers, all of the factories, they all need flour. They all need grain. So they are pretty prevalent. And even I live in the boonies, and there's one an hour away from my house.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's like
So,
really
and
close.
like I had no idea,
Uh-huh.
but you know, they are pretty prevalent. Um, you want to just source locally. I know in the States, you guys have Azure Standard, which is just like chef's kiss. It's you can pick whatever you want. Here in Canada, it's a lot harder to get anything shipped because our shipping is very expensive. So shopping locally, sourcing them is the best way to go. Buying in bulk to
Mhm.
save money. You cannot buy grains. You know, you can't buy a little bag. You're going to end up buying a 55 kilogram bag of grains. And when you that you know, this is why I go back to it's very much an investment because it's not just your money, it's also your space. You
Mhm.
know, you have to figure out where are you going to store these. In my
Right.
last house, like we live in a very nice home with lovely storage here. But I also once lived in mini home,
Mhm.
and my kids literally had grain sacks in their closets because it was cool and dry.
Yeah.
And you know, now I store mine in food grade 5 gallon buckets with oxygenators, and that keeps them happy and that'll store them literally for 30 plus years. So I buy my grains in bulk, I buy them from a local miller. And then once you figure out where your local miller is, that's when you can figure out what grains are accessible to you. Because somewhere like Azure Standard, you're going to have hard white, soft white, hard red. Um, you're going to have kamut. You're going to have the ancient grains like spelt. You're going to have einkorn. You're going to have all of these different options. Or you could be in my situation where your options are pretty limited. You know, my local grain mill sells a lot of red wheat. They sell one soft white. They sell kamut, spelt, and that's it. So those are my options.
Yeah.
So, you know, and so we have discovered, you know, that hard red wheat is great for kind of an overall purpose thing. You know, if you want to make bread, if you want to make waffles, it kind of works with everything. We have discovered that spelt is our absolute favorite and kamut is our favorite,
Mm.
that we like them for different reasons. We like spelt for baking, we like kamut for its flavor. So, you know, the more you explore grains, the more it will, you know, and again, it depends on what you're baking too. Are you baking sourdough? Are you baking a regular loaf of bread, muffins, waffles? What do you eat the most of? You'll figure that out as you go and just playing around with the different grains because there are so many options and you can mix them.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, like you can mix them with white flour, you can mix red and spelt, you can mix, and then you get a different flavor every time. So it's that's kind of like the joy of it.
That's fun.
But you know, just remind me here at the end though, I will tell people what they can do with white flour before they click off because they don't want to drink.
Well, I think
There
that's
is hope, guys. There's
yeah,
hope.
I love that. They're like, don't worry, you don't have to start here. I just think it's good for
No.
people to know that there's a spectrum, right? Like you can start at home just baking from scratch with flour that you buy from
Yeah.
the grocery store. And then there's
Yeah.
the, and of course, like with anything, it's like you can go down the rabbit hole however far you would like to go. But
Yes.
I did not know that about, I'm like, I am going to go look up my mill, local mill now.
Yeah.
That is really great,
Yeah.
great advice. Um, I would love to hear from you just because you have such a great blog. There's a lot of information on there, and I'm just curious if you want to talk a little bit about how you got into blogging and kind of keeping track of this journey that you are on as a family. I would love to know more kind of how that goes. Hold
Sure.
on, it's my dogs.
No, that's all right. I really just started blogging because I felt this pull and this call to one, document my recipes and share what I was learning. Because one, I was getting asked a lot of questions in real life.
I bet.
And I was like, I would love to send these people somewhere.
Yes.
And also too to have like for my daughters and my children to have like this catalog of mom's recipes. And also, I kind of feel like I started an Instagram page probably about 5 years ago,
Okay.
and I kind of did like humor and just kind of like mom life, and it just felt like really inauthentic.
Mm.
And I actually like I was just like a micro, like I had like I think 10,000 followers, but I ended up just deleting that page because it just at the end of the day it literally made me feel icky. It wasn't who I was, and I was just like, you know what, like I don't really want to do this anymore. And so I took a step back and I really just kind of analyzed like what do I want to do and why do I want to do it.
Mm.
And that's when East Pine Home really started. Was I was just like, you know what, I want to help and encourage homemaking, and I want to encourage, and to me half of homemaking is food.
Yes.
um
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, and it is mentioned in the Bible 1,200 times that Jesus sat and ate with people.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Food, food was so important,
Yeah.
and that's where fellowship happens. That's where family happens. That's where friendship happens.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? I want to encourage people to celebrate holidays, to eat good food. And my blog is a mix. Like I do have some whole grain and freshly milled recipes. I also just have some fun recipes that are just delicious. And because I'm down for a Christmas cookie. And so when I think of that, I'm like, that is really the heart of East Pine Home. My tagline is do what you do for his glory. If what you're doing is growing food, cooking, baking, if it's sewing, anything that you do, I truly believe can be done for God's glory. And for me, that comes down to, baking, celebrations, food. I really like to eat, guys. I don't know if anybody picked up on that, but like,
Food's amazing.
and yes,
Yeah,
food's amazing.
it is.
You know
Yeah.
what? I added it up today because I was just like 1,200 meals. That's a lot, and I was like, I really wonder how many meals I have cooked in my 11 years of marriage,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was 1,200
That's a
or
lot.
12,000. Sorry, it's 12,000.
Yeah,
12,000 meals.
that makes more sense.
12,000 meals I have made as a wife and mother in 11 years. And I'm just like, by God's grace, I will have 50 plus more years
Hmm.
of baking. And I'm like, the food is such a big part of our lives.
Yes.
Like, and I think it's sad that some people don't know how to make a loaf of bread. They don't even know how to turn on a mixer. And I'm just
Yes.
like, it's these lost skills that people they don't think is important anymore. Or I'm not it's sad kind of that it's this becoming a lost art. And so I'm like, you know what, I want to break this down to make it so easy that someone, like, if somebody reads my recipes, I want them to look at it and be like, oh, that's not a lot of directions. And it's like, no, it's not, because it's actually quite simple.
I think
And
that's always the case, right? Is helping people see that it can be really simple, right?
mhm,
It doesn't
yeah.
have to be overly complicated. And I think that's why so many people, like when they're drawn to uh, this type of lifestyle and everything, they do start in the kitchen a lot of the times. So I agree with you so much
Yeah.
on just like being there and the connection of food, like it's like across cultures. It's like we come together at a table to eat with one another. It's just so important for us as human beings. It's
Well,
amazing.
you know what? We have to eat.
Yeah, we
You
do.
have to eat. You have to
Yeah.
eat. You
Yeah.
you 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 can't get around it.
No.
So you can either eat some lettuce with some olive oil on it, or you could have a beautiful loaf of bread. So
Yeah.
like, listen, I'm down for the carbs, and I want it to be, just so good. And I love a quote from it's actually her Sarah Clarkson. She's an author, and like people were asking like, how did your family like all be Christians and stuff? And she was like, I'm pretty sure we all became Christians by French toast on Sunday mornings.
Oh, how fun. How fun.
And she's like, it was through food. It was through just sitting around and eating really good food. And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what my kids will come back and say too.
Well, it gives you the opportunity to sit down and talk with one another, to check in with one
Yeah.
another. It's such a healthy thing. It's so healthy for a family to have that time. And then if it's punctuated with a muffin recipe or a French toast recipe or well, your waffles, which I'm like, that sounds so good. Uh
Yeah.
then it's like it just becomes part of that experience, and it's really enriching. I think it enriches your roots of who you are, and that's very important. uh
Well, and I think that gathering around a table, it just creates a rhythm, a
yes.
rhythm in your life to connect, to share, to learn.
Yeah.
If your house is the body, your kitchen is the heart.
Mhm.
And what is pumping in and out of that kitchen, it can be so good. It can be so good.
Yes, I always think that, and I'm always want to be like, "Yeah, it'll be so good," and it doesn't have to like be overwhelming. It can just be.
No.
But you were going to say something about just regular flour. I think before
Yes.
I want to make sure that
Yes.
you get that in before we.
Yes, before we go.
Mm.
So if anyone is listening and they listen to my flower rant and were like, "Oh dear," and I put a fear of pit in your heart, I want to reassure you that um if you want to just use white flour, go right ahead. That is where I started, and I baked with white flour, all purpose, the cheapest I could find at Costco for literally 9 years. And I don't regret it one bit. White flour is where you start. If
Mhm.
you have never baked a day in your life, please do not go buy a grain mill, um,
No.
because it's going to be very overwhelming. Go buy some white flour, perfect a white bread recipe, and start there. Because to learn dough, to learn everything, it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes practice. And white flour is just a shoe-in for success. So always start with white flour. And buy the cheapest you can, because trust me, your girls made a lot of really bad loaves and a lot of really bad like recipes. And it takes time to find the good ones and to find what you can do and just memorize it and whip it out quickly. So there's that. Also, if you heard that rant and now you're like falling down the rabbit hole of, oh, flour's not good for me and it's a filler food,
Mhm.
which it's just, it kind of sucks to learn information like that, if you've never heard of it before. So, what I would encourage those people to do and seek out is sourdough.
Mhm.
Um, with sourdough, you get the benefits of fermentation. You are getting some health benefits. You can turn something that is not so great for your health into something that is pretty great. And so, is the flour magically going to be healthier? No, you're not adding, the nutrients back in, but you're adding the benefits of fermentation. So fall down that rabbit hole. There are I have some sourdough, I have sourdough starter recipe on my blog that you can check out. And there are literally thousands of people doing sourdough right now.
Yeah.
So go fall down that rabbit hole and seek out, influencers and fill your Instagram up with sourdough, and you'll feel encouraged. And that is something that you can do to, you know, make something that you're making just a little bit healthier.
I like that you just told them to actually fill their social feeds with something like that, because that is really inspiring. I think that
Yeah.
when you can curate it for yourself, and that, like, that's very powerful to be able to say, wait, I'm interested in these things. This is what I'd like to see. And so
Hmm.
following it, that's really good, because then that way you're not feeling as I don't know, it can be overwhelming. So I love that idea of picking, like, starting here and then maybe branching out into that sourdough realm is it's great.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's great to like open up your Instagram and feel inspired.
Yeah.
If you've
Yeah.
made like the worst loaf ever, type in easy sourdough and you'll get 20 million people show up
Yeah.
that are like, I will help you. I will educate you.
Mm,
I'm going to point you towards this resource, this book, this video.
yeah.
And when you start feeling, because I mean, social media can be just the pits. It can make us feel terrible about our homes, or,
True.
it can make us feel terrible in a million ways. And I'm
Absolutely.
like,
Mhm.
but you know what? Social media is really powerful for motivating us and inspiring us to to learn something, to do something better. Like when I see like all those beautiful sourdough scores and stuff, I'm like, I bet I can do that if I do it enough.
I really love your like I love your confidence, because I think that's something that is a quality that happens in this realm a lot. Like, you have to have some level of of confidence in your abilities, and to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to learn how to do this, which means that you're not afraid to be a beginner. And I think that that's really important. I just wanted to say to you, like,
No,
I
I
noticed
I
that.
was
I think it's
born.
impressive.
No, I was very much born with how hard could it be, Gene? Or
Mm,
like, sourdough, how hard could that be? Big, how hard could
honestly,
that be? I'm like,
yeah,
I bet, like, if, and yeah, and I think that again, with social media, we're exposed to literal professionals and experts in
very
every
true.
genre, every area, and that can make us feel really low. And I think that, it's okay, like I said, to make 100 bad loaves, because that 101 might be it. You
Mm,
might nail it, because it does take time. Baking is to learn the different textures, to learn, what consistency your sourdough starter should be, to learn what consistency your waffle mixture should be, or how sticky your bread dough should be. Like, that takes time to learn, and a lot of us were never shown. A lot
I
of us
know.
were never in the kitchen. A lot of us grew up with the 100-calorie Oreo packs and PB&J smeared on, store-bought bread. We didn't know, and we weren't taught. And, it's really hard being an adult and then having to take something back down that you don't know.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
deconstructing yourself down to, I suck at this and I'm going to suck at it for a while. But you know what? It's a good thing. I think we could all use some humbling from time to time.
So, I mean, it's a good, but it's the humbling, and then the ability to pick yourself back up and be like, well, I'll do it again. And I
Yeah,
think that takes a real curious, hopeful mind. And I
yeah.
think that's something that people who are interested in doing this type of stuff, if they can cultivate that in themselves, they will find this
Mhm.
process way more fun, you know,
Yeah.
because you're gonna
And
have
I
always
and I
I always have more failures than successes with anything. So
Well, and I think a lot of people get perfectionist paralysis,
yeah, that's true.
where
Yeah.
they're so nervous that they overthink it, and it's just like, guys, it's a loaf of bread. And
Sorry.
if it if you know somebody who has chickens or pigs and you screw it up, just chuck it to them. But you know what? 9 times out of 10, those dense bricks of bread that you're making are still edible and you can still eat them.
Mhm.
Worst comes to worst, you turn them into croutons or breadcrumbs.
There you
You can
go.
still do something with them. So if you look at it from that perspective that it's not going to go to waste, then maybe it'll make you feel better. But like I said, or you can just get the cheapest flour and hope for the best. And you don't have to tell anybody when you make the worst loaf ever and it goes in the garbage. I know there's probably like some green eco people that are like, oh, that's horrible for food waste. And it's like, yeah, but
Compost, it'll be
in the
fine.
long run,
Yeah.
when you're making your own stuff, then it's better for the environment. So look at the big picture.
Well, you know, and that's why I'm always like, you know, I think your suggestion of feeding it to an animal that needs it's great. And then they can just, if you compost it, then it's going to be fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
It'll go right back into the earth and help
Yeah.
promote, you know, the next round of whatever the grain is. So
Yeah.
I just think it's really good for people to hear that there's permission to make mistakes
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
permission to just start where you are and go from there, right? Follow that
Yeah.
curiosity and
Yeah.
have a hopeful mindset that it's going to be all right. Okay, so
Yes.
where can people find you? I want people to be able to find where you
So,
are and get all your good stuff.
yeah. So I am on Instagram, I am on YouTube, and I am on my blog, and all across the board, it is East Pine Home. So you can find me eastpinehome.ca, and then East Pine Home on YouTube and Instagram. Those are my main platforms. I'm most active on Instagram right now, and also I'm on Pinterest. So if you're really into pinning, please come and follow me on Pinterest. I post absolutely everything on my blog there. So if you're looking to fill up your boards with recipes and stuff, I'm your girl. But yeah, those are pretty much my main platforms. And but more personally, if you want to, chat with me face to face and stuff, I'm always on my Instagram stories. You can see all my kids' shenanigans and
Fun.
every time my crazy chickens and ducks get out.
I didn't go follow you. I'm like, I don't know if I'm following you yet. I gotta go make sure that that's happening. So I should know. I was like, oh, you're on Instagram. Okay, I gotta go be open.
I'm on Instagram.
Okay, okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, well, it's been really wonderful to talk with you today and just like get to hear your story. I just thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh gosh, I would love to have you back. We could probably talk more about the grain mill, all these things. Like there's so much more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Awesome.
Thank you again. So
Thank you.